Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. Hey there, and welcome to the podcast. In the last episode, I talked about the importance of allowing and really processing your painful emotions in order to truly heal. Today, I want to talk about the importance of learning from your marriage by taking a really good look at the dynamics that existed between you and your ex and understanding what part you played in that dynamic. But before I get started, first, I just want to give a small caveat about this episode. I am 100% supportive and affirming of same sex relationships. But in this episode, I'm really speaking more about heterosexual relationships because the topic that I'm going to address is really directly related to the societal conditioning that women have received and how this conditioning causes a lot of women to show up in their marriages. Sometimes it's really easy to paint one person in the relationship as the bad guy, the villain who's to blame for the breakdown of the marriage. However, I really don't think this is a helpful way to look at relationships that have ended. Because if you believe you're the villain, then you will beat yourself up and you can really spiral down into guilt and shame. And believe me, when you are swimming in that sea of guilt and shame, you aren't showing up very well for yourself or for your kids for that matter. You're really focused on the past and how badly you feel about yourself. Now, I'm going to do a whole episode on feeling guilty after divorce in the future. So definitely be on the lookout for that if that's something that you have struggled with. Now, if you believe that your ex is the villain, then you can really get stuck in victim mentality, focusing on what he did wrong, how unfair it is, how angry you are that he's moving on and he seems happy while you're miserable. I hear so many women stuck in this place, and it really just doesn't enable you to move forward. It prevents you also from being able to see how you may have contributed to the downfall of the relationship. So, I want to talk about a really common dynamic that I have heard lots of women describe that they had in their marriages. And so, I'm sure a lot of you are going to be able to relate to this. And so, I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. So, I'm just wondering if this sounds familiar to you. I'm going to read out some statements from real women that I've interacted with, divorced women who talk about what their marriages were like. So, here's what they had to say. I avoided conflict and felt like I was walking on eggshells. I felt like it was my job to keep the peace in the family. I put myself last and made sure everyone else had their needs met. I felt invisible as a person and was only really acknowledged for what I did for my husband and my kids. I tried my best to make everyone else happy. When I spoke up, it was taken as an attack. I prided myself on being flexible, understanding, and empathetic. I gave so much of myself, and I didn't get the same in return. I went along with the way he wanted to discipline the kids, even though I disagreed. I made a lot of excuses for his bad behavior. So, what I have described here and what I have shared is people pleasing. So, first of all, I just want you to understand there is absolutely nothing wrong with giving, serving, putting other people's needs above your own sometimes. I myself am a very natural helper. I'm in type 2 on the Enneagram, if you're familiar with that. So, most of the time, helping and serving other people feels so life giving to me. I love doing it. But it becomes a problem when we continually meet other people's needs at the expense of our own needs. It's not healthy or good for us when we're always sacrificing what we want in order to give someone else what they want. It's when you think that your own needs don't really matter and that it's selfish if you ever put yourself first. So when you show up this way, you can really lose yourself. You abandon your own needs and wants. And when you're in a relationship and showing up this way, it can feel like you are shrinking and becoming smaller and smaller. And honestly, there's a good reason or an understandable reason that so many women show up like this. And simply put, it's due to our societal conditioning and patriarchy. So I want you to think about it. How did you witness your mom or your grandmother show up in their marriages? Were they sacrificially serving and giving? Were they behind the scenes doing tasks that maybe didn't receive a lot of appreciation? Did they allow their husbands to make most of the decisions? A lot of us were given this type of example in a relationship by previous generations. And so it makes sense that we just followed suit. It was what we were taught by example growing up. And if you're not aware of this fact, do a little research because this is an accurate statement that I'm about to make. But historically, men have had way more power and control in society and in families. Now, thankfully, this has changed and is still changing, but it is sometimes so crazy for me to realize things like women couldn't vote until 1920. Women couldn't have a credit card in their own name until 1974. That was not that long ago. My point in saying all this is that our tendency to show up as people pleasers in our families it comes about honestly, right? We were taught to do this by our own parents, by our whole society as a whole, and also by our religions. A lot of religions teach this patriarchal way of showing up in relationships. Now, I realize that we all have different ideas of what gender roles should be like in relationships. And I am a firm believer that everyone should decide what works for them. As long as you're not hurting other people, I love the fact that we all have the freedom to choose how we want to live, how we want to interact with others. And so if you're listening to this and you're disagreeing, that is totally fine. If you want to be in a subservient type of role to your significant other, if you want to allow them to make important decisions, if you want to sacrificially give and serve, then by all means do that. However, I really have seen some very negative repercussions of this type of marriage dynamic. And a lot of times it does lead to divorce. And so I just want to share those with you because I have a feeling that a lot of you can relate. So, a lot of times when there is this people pleasing dynamic between a husband and wife, the woman feels diminished, like I said, made smaller or even invisible. They might feel like they're only seen because of what they do for others. They can feel like they are being pushed aside or crammed into a box. And this can really cause women to reach a breaking point where they either decide to leave the marriage or they start to speak up finally. They start explaining to their partner that they don't feel seen or appreciated. They may start finally disagreeing with their partner or asking their partner to do more around the house or with the kids. And so when this happens, it can obviously go a few different ways. The husband in this scenario might listen and care about his wife's feelings. He might be willing to change the dynamic and work with her on this, or he might resist. He might push back. He might blatantly refuse to change anything. Another thing that can happen when there's a people pleasing dynamic is that the man wants out of the relationship. I think it's kind of interesting when this happens, and I think this leaves a lot of women feeling confused. I've heard a lot of women say, I did everything. I gave and gave and gave. I tried to please him, but he left, or he had an affair, or he was never satisfied. And on the surface, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But when you look a little deeper at the dynamic that's going on here, you'll see that it doesn't represent true intimacy. When a woman doesn't show up as her authentic self, she's really putting on a bit of a facade. She's holding back some of her true thoughts, feelings, and opinions. So, in an effort to be accommodating and pleasing and unselfish, she actually shows up as an inauthentic, kind of fake version of herself. And so, if you found yourself in this situation, you may have thought that you were doing the best job you could as a wife, because again, this role is what we were taught. And so your intentions were good. You were trying to create this good relationship and please your partner and be the kind of wife that you thought your husband wanted. But it can actually create a disconnected relationship. Now, I will say that there are plenty of marriages where this dynamic of the woman giving and serving and pleasing is completely fine with the man. He's getting what he wants or he needs, and they probably remain married. And maybe this works for the wife too, but for a lot of people, it doesn't. So, a lot of times, the vast majority of the time, when women people please, it doesn't create a healthy, connected relationship. It either creates a very stagnant, flat, disconnected relationship, or it creates one that has a big imbalance of power and control. Now, let me be clear that as I'm describing this scenario, the man in the scenario also has obviously a huge part to play in this. And the fact that I'm speaking to the woman's side of this, I am not at all in any way blaming a woman for this dynamic. The dynamic I'm describing of the woman being the people pleaser is definitely more advantageous for the man. And so a lot of men don't want to change this dynamic, understandably, because they're getting what they want or what they need most of the time. But for women, it's not working for us. And I truly believe that this is why a lot of women choose divorce these days. I think the statistic is that about 70% of women are the ones who want the divorce. And so today I just want to focus on the role that women play in this scenario, but I'm not saying that women are to blame for this dynamic. So please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But if you recognize yourself in any of these scenarios that I've described, any of those statements that I read earlier from real women out there, if you identify with those, then you are a people pleaser. And it's really important to see this tendency in yourself so that you can work on it, so you can change, so you can show up as a better version of yourself in future romantic relationships, but also just in any type of relationship that you have. So if you strongly identify already as a people pleaser and you want to work on that, I want to recommend a podcast that I've been listening to for a while. It's called the Ex Good Girl Podcast by Sarah Fisk. And I was actually a guest on this podcast very recently, episode 71, which was such a treat to have a conversation with Sarah about my own marriage and divorce story. I got very vulnerable, very personal, and shared a lot about what happened in my marriage and divorce. And so if you want to hear that, I would love for you to go over there and take a listen. Or regardless, I would love for you to check her podcast out if what I'm saying is resonating with you and you know that you tend to struggle with being a people pleaser, because she really breaks down why we people please and how we can stop. So if this is how you showed up in your marriage, like I said, you probably also show up like this in other relationships. So even if you don't have any plans to date anytime soon, working on your people pleasing will benefit all of the relationships in your life. So now that I've shared what it looks like when you people please in marriage, now what? What do we do to break this cycle? How do we stop people pleasing? Well, the way to do this is to start focusing and working on your relationship with yourself. Now, many of you have probably been given this advice. It's very popular advice out there once you're divorced, is like, now it's time to work on yourself. And I've even talked to some divorced women who roll their eyes and say they're really just tired of hearing this advice. I understand that, but I also 100% stand behind the idea that it is vital if you want to become a better version of yourself. If you don't want to repeat past mistakes, then you need to work on your relationship with yourself. The relationship that you have with yourself is truly the most important relationship of your life. It's the longest relationship you'll ever have. I mean, you're always with yourself. You have to live day in, day out with this running commentary in your mind, which includes a lot of thoughts about yourself. And that's truly what your relationship with yourself is. When you break it down and really think about what it is, it starts with your thoughts about yourself. And your thoughts about yourself lead to your feelings about yourself. And your feelings about yourself dictate how you're going to treat yourself, the actions you decide to take. If you're thinking to yourself, I am amazing, I'm unique, I have so much value to offer the world, I am such a good friend, I am talented. If you're thinking thoughts like that about yourself, that leads to confidence. That leads to joy. That leads to very positive emotions that you have, right, about yourself. On the contrary, if you're thinking things like, I'm not very good at this, nobody really likes the real me, I don't know how to do XYZ. If you're always criticizing yourself, then obviously that leads to negative emotions about yourself, and it leads to either non actions or actions that don't really get you the results you want. So, nurturing the relationship with yourself is so, so important. And so, I want to give you some very concrete advice or recommendations. Like, I mean, what does it even really mean to work on yourself? Well, here are some ways you can do it. Number one is just to get to know yourself. When you have lost yourself in your marriage, then once you're divorced, you can feel pretty confused about who you even are. Figuring out what you like and don't like is a really good first step to understanding yourself better, of knowing yourself more fully. I know some of these examples may seem silly, but things like decorating your house the way you want, eating the food that you want to eat, dressing the way you want to dress, watching the shows you want to watch on Netflix. All of these small things matter. How you spend your time, where you put your focus, what you choose to do, all of those little decisions add up to create the life you're living. Number 2 is to identify your values and let those guide you. Inside my 12-week program, I have a values assessment that really helps my clients identify which values are most important to them. And when I say values, I mean things like independence, kindness, honesty, hardworking. There's lots and lots of values out there, and most of us can see the importance of these values, but there are definitely certain ones that stand out to us or that are more important to us than others. And so it's really good to figure out which values you hold the highest and to allow these to be guideposts so that you can know what to focus on and what to use to evaluate your decisions. Number 3 is to believe that your needs matter, that you are as equally valuable as everyone else that you interact with. It is okay for you to take up space, and I mean physically and emotionally. When you believe that your needs matter, you'll start learning how to speak up when you need something. Believing that your needs matter also allows you to set boundaries. And number 4 is to be kind and compassionate to yourself. Notice your critical self-talk and work on changing that. Ask yourself if you would speak to your child or your best friend the way that you sometimes talk to yourself. So being aware of your people-pleasing tendencies and changing the way you show up in relationships is something that will serve you for the rest of your life. So if the ideas that I've shared with you today have really resonated, I just encourage you to continue or start really doing work on yourself in this area. Working on your relationship with yourself is a great gift to give yourself after divorce. Even if you don't feel like you particularly struggle with people pleasing, I hope you'll take those 4 ideas that I shared and take those to heart. Those can help anyone. If you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed, or you just really don't know where to start, I am here for you. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I would love to talk with you about this. You can email me at Angie@AngieWilsonCoaching.com, or you can send me a message on Instagram at AngieWilsonCoaching. Your marriage ended, but your life is not over. Get the free roadmap to move on faster after divorce. Just head over to my website at AngieWilsonCoaching.com and click Get the Free Roadmap.